Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at Warhammer Siege, i.e. the best supplement ever made. Except Dark Millennium, but we won't go into that now. Anyway, before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. The year is 1988. It has already been half a decade since lightning was last captured in a bottle with the release of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Yes, the 80s were a special decade indeed. So what better time to release another seminal work in the form of Warhammer Siege? Warhammer Siege. Where to begin with this mighty tome of knowledge? Let's start with the fantastic artwork on the front of the thing. Clearly it's by that there Ian Miller. Who else could it be with gribbly madness like this gloriously splashed all over the cover? Yes, there's no doubt you have a piece of quality literature in your possession when Ian Miller's involved, that's for sure. Speaking of quality literature, this fine specimen was written by the old man himself, Rick Priestley, one of the finest rule crafters in the land. So, safe in the knowledge you're in good hands, as a great man once said.
Let's get down to it, baby.
Here we are, the contents page, and straight off the bat you'll notice we have a lot to get through, and, well, however long this video is to get it done. So, let's start adding some value, shall we? The illustrations throughout the book have been done by Ian Miller himself, the venerable Tony Ackland, Dave Andrews, Nick Bibby, Paul Bonner, Angus Fieldhouse, Dave Gallagher, yes, the man himself, a mysterious being known only as H, my good pal Tony Howe, Ross Nicholson, Stephen Tappin, and Nick Williams. The series of maps were done by the nefarious H2, whilst the logo was done by Brian Smallwood. The miniatures were designed by the still prolific Kev Adams, Mark Copplestone, Jez Goodwin, Ali and Trish Morrison, Bob Naismith, Bob Ollie, and the Perry twins. The dioramas were created by Dave Andrews, Phil Lewis, a young, impressionable Mike McVeigh, Darren Matthews, and a chap called Sid. Finally, rounding off the team was Pete Nifton, who penned a series of counters to be found at the rear of the book. All right, with the obligatory flat cap tipped to the team, off we go. Now, nothing enhances the Wargames table quite like a finely detailed model castle, as the photographs in this volume so clearly demonstrate. Until now, however, only the most dedicated or wealthy of Warhammer players, Games Workshop knew their audience even back then, didn't they? Blessed with plenty of patience and a gift for modelling, could ever hope to field such an item. But not anymore, with the release of the mighty fortress. Citadel miniatures have made it possible for any player to add a new dimension to their tabletop, and Warhammer Siege has been specifically designed around the mighty fortress, enabling you to make the most of this splendid model. From straightforward assaults to full-scale sieges lasting months of game time. And wait, that's not all. The mighty fortress works equally well in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Whether you use it to represent a simple marine outpost on some god-forsaken feral world, or a shining example of orcish know-what. So, Warhammer Siege includes a special section explaining how to use the fortress in your Warhammer 40,000 games. Building a castle. In medieval times, kings and barons spent many years and personal fortunes building castles. Fortunately, times have changed. Have they, Rick? Have they? Today you can build a castle quickly and easily from one or more mighty fortress sets, and it won't cost you anything like as much either. I'm not so sure about that, but let's carry on regardless, shall we? As you can see from the castle layout, the modular nature of the mighty fortress lends itself eminently well to the construction of any manner of defensive grand design. Whilst some of the designs clearly use the single set, such as the classic keep and border fortress, the fort and fastness both use multiple sets. Now you will have to ready yourself for what you are about to see. On the following page we come across the blasphemous Motte and Bailey, which advocates the cutting up of your fine wall pieces in an effort to make some bastard creation unfit for use on the grim dark battlefields of the Warhammer world, nor the verdant green pastures of Warhammer 40,000. So, the less said about that the better. Let's just concentrate on proper use of the mighty fortress, such as a beautiful dwarven mountain hold, stronghold, or the incredibly impressive Marcher Castle. Rick, in his infinite wisdom, knew that Warhammer is a game of bitter rivalries where no quarter must be spared to one's opponent. As such, we already come across the necessity for a games master. Yes, we are just 9 pages in, and already we are mandating the use of a third party to ensure bickering and quarrels are settled in the appropriate fashion. Anyway, enough of that. Of course we need a map. Otherwise, how will we be able to keep track of all the intricate comings and goings of such a vast citadel? Now, the map is a crucial piece of the game, for it details damage received by the wall and tower pieces, troop movements and positions, amongst other details, such as placement of doors and passages. This is all elaborated in the following section, Anatomy of a Castle, which discusses the technical terms we will be using when talking about our castles: sections, courtyards, levels, towers, walls, gates, doors, stairs, ladders, all very good stuff. Using the castle map. What follows is a treatise on using the castle map, interactions with the GM, placement of counters, how movement on the map relates to the physical terrain, concealment and exposure. After all, why advertise the placement of your best troops to the enemy? This is where we inject a good element of realism into the game. Could an individual be seen in a certain spot, if hiding or not? If so, the counter's concealed. If not, then the counter's exposed. This is combined with the enemy player's character's level of awareness. It is up to the GM to adjudicate awareness to ensure it is applied fairly and evenly across the battle. Movement in the castle. Next up we have movement, detailing when models can be moved, how many models may occupy a section or tower, and of course movement itself. Movement is a little tricky, as it's not conducted using movement value, but rather occupants have their own movement allowance whilst in the castle. Now let's break it down. A single connecting line, read width of the ramparts, allows up to 4 models to move between the section or levels in one movement phase. A double connecting line allows up to 8 models to move between the section levels in one movement phase. A triple connecting line allows up to 12 models to move between the section levels in one movement phase. Note, this is irrespective of direction of movement. Essentially, we're talking about bottlenecks. You have less bottlenecking of troops along ramparts if you have wider walkways. Next up, we have movement restrictions. For instance, you may move 4 models off a single line section, but not 4 models on in the same turn. It's 4 models in total, so you can swap out 2 for 2, 3 for 1, etc. Vertical movement can be assisted by using ladders and stairs, again allowing movement equal to a single line section, i.e. 4 models in any direction in total. Courtyard sections also have their own movement restrictions. This is where things get a little weird, because you would imagine normal movement rates to take over when in the courtyard. However, the courtyard is also subdivided into sections and thus are treated as per sections, ramparts or towers. That being, movement is restricted to moving between adjacent sections only, unless their movement is 6 or higher, in which case they can move 2 sections. And again, we hit restrictions on the number of troops allowed to occupy and move between courtyard sections. When it comes to gates, we find that a total of 12 models may move through in a single turn, which severely limits the access and egress of the castle. You might have to consider some alternative fire escapes, otherwise health and safety are going to come down on you like a pot of boiling oil. Anyways, this ensures the castle cannot be overwhelmed by sheer numbers when the gate is breached, but gives the assaulting force enough of a lodgment to continue the attack unless immediately repelled by the defenders. Of note, a model cannot move through a section that is full of friendly models. The unit's cohesion too works differently in that they do not need to be in base contact, but must occupy the same or adjacent sections of the castle, so long as there is free access between them. A loss of unit cohesion because of extraneous factors such as casualties or wall collapse means you simply have to move them into cohesion as soon as possible, as you might expect. If they can't reform, then they are classed as 2 separate units from then on. 2 or more units may occupy the same section, so long as the normal rules for movement and occupation of a section are adhered to. As you might expect, movement outside of this parallel world of fortifications and battlements is conducted as normal. Characters that join units and associate themselves with them are then bound by the same rules. Combat in the castle. Alright, enough of that technical mumbo-jumbo. You are here for combat, and combat is what ye shall receive. Combat is conducted in the normal way, issuing charges, moving, assaulting the defending enemy, etc. However, the movement restrictions are of course still enforced as discussed. Now this is where it gets interesting. Every model on a section may fight, regardless of how wide the gangways are, so you can get instances where there are 8 versus 1. Things further confuse when you realise none of those fancy weapons you carefully modelled are of any use in a castle. All models revert to using a trusty hand weapon, plus modifiers for maintaining the high ground and for the winning side from the previous round of combat. While psychology is used as normal, charges do not occur, as there is no room, so any bonuses for charging are also defunct. Retreating, as in losing a combat and immediately moving away from the engagement. Retiring, as in moving out of an engagement in the troop's movement turn. Routing, meanwhile, only affects the section that has been resoundingly defeated in combat. So, some members of a unit may decide they have a better chance of survival by fighting on while their comrades down tools and hit the road. Occasionally, models will get trapped in the passageways, towers, etc. through sheer weight of bodies in the castle, in which case, if they are beaten in combat and must take a leadership test and roll a double 1, they go into a frenzy and are subject to the rules as such. If they fail their test, they are routed as normal. Being routed is not nice, and there are a series of rules to treat models who have been routed. Disengaging from the fight, cohesion, subsequent movement, coming under attack, rallying, and access restrictions. And probably best not to be routed in the first place. Missile fire. Alright, on to missile fire. Light missile weapons used against enemy personnel such as bows, crossbows, slings, spears, rather than the large war machines that will be covered later, such as bolt throwers and the like. Shooting is handily treated as per the Warhammer Fantasy Battle rules. However, instead of targeting individual units within a section or tower, everyone within the tower that is exposed can be seen and thus targeted. Naturally, models who are not exposed are not targetable. We then have a series of rules dictating shooting to and from towers, ramparts, walls, etc. All good stuff. Structural damage. Particularly powerful adversaries will bring a variety of war machines designed to lay low your proud castle. Battering rams, mantlets, and siege towers to name but a few useful contraptions. The first objective of the besieger is to gain entry into the castle. This can be achieved by digging tunnels, assaulting the walls with scaling ladders, employing magic, or even aerial transport. But by far the most impressive way to enter a castle is through the smouldering remains of its main gate, or the rubble of a toppled wall. To assist us, we will need some defense points. Each section and tower is capable of sustaining a certain amount of damage before inevitable collapse. In this iteration of the rules, our sections and walls have 10 defense points. It is essential the defender and the GM ensure that the defense points for each section are recorded throughout the game. Once a section has received damage equaling its defense points, the GM must roll on the damage table with the results ranging from the relatively benign, shaky and unsafe, extremely unstable, breached, breach, major collapse, extreme collapse, secondary collapse, major secondary collapse, tertiary collapse, and major tertiary collapse, which compounds the problems of the previous rolls, creating a kind of domino effect of section collapses. Here we can see a Skaven horde descending upon a hapless bunch of high elves. How on earth a bunch of rats managed to pull down an elven stronghold is beyond me. Perhaps they popped a warpstone bomb under the wall or something. With all the damage your castle is going to take, it's essential you model some damaged sections of wall and collapsed towers to replace the ones destroyed in battle. Absolute harlots amongst you will just chop up your beautiful mighty fortress and think you've done yourself proud. Not so fast, youngster. Why not grab yourself some polystyrene from a delivery centre or hobby store and chop that up instead? You don't want to wreck your beautiful fortress for the sake of making some old rubble. If you're a real mad lad, you could build your own sections or even take a cast of your fortress walls and make a plaster set of walls to break up to portray varying levels of damage. Gates and doors. A castle's main gateway is always the weakest point in its defences, and gates are often the spot chosen by the attacker for his main assault. To meet this threat, gates are often heavily constructed and may be protected by outworks such as barbicans. Even so, gates are vulnerable to siege machines such as battering rams and large creatures such as giants and trolls. The gate has its own toughness and defense points, like sections. The GM must record damage to the gate in the same way as damage received by any sections. Doors and trapdoors, meanwhile, are assumed to have heavy bolts to prevent attackers making their way through the castle with ease. The rules also detail how to break down doors and trapdoors. Here we have some brave orcs attacking a human stronghold. And here we have some goblins about to be splattered into a million pieces by a dwarven hold. Silly fools. What did they expect would happen? It even says, and I quote, "I don't think the attackers know what they've let themselves in for." Yeah, I bet. From here we move on to the intricacies of blocking, i.e. the placement of a model in the way to hold up enemies. Note, larger humanoids can block larger passages like gateways and breached sections of wall. Assaulting the ramparts. Whilst an open assault may not be the most efficient way of taking a castle, it's certainly satisfying. It is a brave commander who decides to storm a castle. Many troops will be killed as they push lumbering machines towards the walls, and many more will be cast from the battlements or slaughtered as they tried to hold crumbling ramparts against determined defenders. Naturally, some troops are ideal for this sort of tough, demanding and generally fatal work. Goblins, for example. After all, why waste time having your goblins build complicated and probably ineffectual machines when they can be doing what they do best, dying in droves? Well, what better way to assault the ramparts than with a trusty set of ladders? They need carrying, occasionally dropping, erecting, casting down, climbing and blocking. Well, who knew ladders could be so complicated? Anyway, let's have a look at this glorious scene and wait a second. I recognise that dapper chap. Check out that fine mullet too, very handsome indeed. Not entirely convinced by the shirt made from my parents' curtains though, I have to admit. Differing methods for scaling walls do exist, however. Grappling hooks are a good bet, although the model carrying one may not use a shield nor a missile weapon. If you can't go over the walls though, why not try to go through them? What you need is a good sturdy log ram. Defending the walls. Defenders are in an enviable position in such a fight. They have access to a wide variety of lethal and not so lethal defensive stratagems, such as dropping things on their enemies, missiles, rocks, boulders, lime, hot stuff like braziers, hot coals, hot sand, boiling water, burning oil, or if they are particularly dastardly, molten lead. Rampaging hordes of orcs and goblins. What a beautiful sight to wake up to. Large humanoids. Alright, now we're cooking on gas. It is these fellows that will make or break your assault or defence. Their strength allows for causing damage directly to sections and levels of wall, whilst their bulk allows for the blocking of gaps in the defensive line. Would you look at this? A historical dust-up for all you handsome, nice-smelling gents out there who fancy yourselves medieval generals. You knew I wouldn't let you down. Starting the game. Now we are into the important stuff, and straight away we are greeted by Rick Priestley in a sleeveless vest of some description. In the 1980s, this was the height of raunchiness. My goodness. Nevertheless, we will need to select our forces, decide who's going to be the aggressive attacker, and who will be the stalwart defender. Dish out some handy special equipment with the appropriate points values, as you can see here, and we move swiftly on to beginning the game and what victory conditions must be met to win. What follows is the defense of Karaz Lumbar, an opportunity to replay a conflict of old. The page contains a pair of pre-made forces and some directions on setup, with the background being in a distant, steep-sided and forbidding valley in the World's Edge Mountains stands a decayed and neglected property. Abandoned and almost forgotten, this unwelcoming pile of stones is visited by no one save the mountain birds and the occasional misdirected and consequently rather miffed Imperial messenger. It was not always so. Once this stony edifice was one of many border fortresses, the very backbone of a defence system that separated the dwarven realm of old from the untamed forests of the west. Once the battlements of the fortress of Karaz Lumbar echoed to the angry chatter of steel and the sudden scream of iron upon iron. The dwarven realm was crumbling, and carrion of all kinds crowded in to squabble over the crumbs. One such crumb-picking crowd was the horde of Bogrot Stuntybane, a ragtag army of orcs and goblins supported by the giant Grimsmirk Danglejaw of Dog's Bottom Down. Lovely stuff. Introducing the strategic map. Right, so we've already seen how the attacking side is divided into 4 forces, corresponding to the 4 table edges and the 4 points of the compass. This simple system is an ideal way of representing a straightforward assault. It is, however, unsatisfactory for representing larger or more involved sieges. It does not, for example, allow the besieger to move troops around the outside of the castle, or to build and use long-range siege weapons. To overcome these limitations, we shall use another map. This is called the strategic map. It is used to control the movement and activities of the besiegers around the castle. The strategic map shows a schematic plan view of the area around the castle. The attacking player is given a strategic map before the game begins. During the game, the player uses the map to record the positions and movement of his troops. Like the defender's castle map, the attacker's strategic map should be concealed from the enemy at all times. The strategic map is split into quadrants, and the distance from the battlefield represented by the tabletop. It is here that the besieger places his forces, and it is this placement that dictates the availability of his troops throughout the game. Naturally, those who are placed remotely need to be force-marched at pace to join the battle in time, whilst those who are encamped are relatively close by. The remaining forces who are standing at the ready are there to be used in anger. And once the besieging troops have been placed on the strategic map, the defending player is asked by the GM if he is aware of any troop concentrations. This will be explained shortly. Once the defender has been made aware of troops or war machines that are within visible or scouting range, he may deploy his own troops. The attacker takes one turn on the strategic map for every turn on the tabletop. And units may move between two adjacent zones during a turn, from remote to encamped, encamped to ready, or ready to the battlefield. Being classed as remote allows the unit to forage for supplies or patrol the surrounding countryside, which will be detailed shortly. Units may also occasionally move between any adjacent remote zone if their rules allow it. They may always move between adjacent encamped zones, but they may never move between adjacent ready zones, as this is the preparatory area. The besieger is limited to 1d6 worth of units that can be moved on the strategic map each turn. Finally, the zones of the strategic map are deemed to be outside of normal missile fire. However, some war machines may fire upon the ready zone, as described later. Strategic awareness. As explained earlier, in using the castle map, besiegers may see exposed defenders and may be aware of concealed defenders. And besiegers on the strategic map cannot be aware of defenders in the castle. Defenders, however, may be aware of besieging troops on the strategic map. It is possible to see some way from the castle's ramparts and towers. Lookouts among the defenders are able to observe much of the surrounding area, including the siege lines and the besiegers' camp. The besiegers will, of course, try to keep troop movements and activities as secret as possible. They may go so far as to light phantom campfires for troops that aren't really there, or open up false mine heads without starting any real tunnelling. It is up to the GM to adjudicate the awareness rules, informing the defending player of activity in the various zones as appropriate, with the following caveats. Defending troops are never aware of activity in the remote zone. Defending troops can discern only vague details concerning the encamped zone with the appropriate rules applying. And defending troops may see in greater detail with reference to the ready zone with the appropriate rules applying. Strategic time. Historical sieges were often long drawn-out affairs, lasting many months. This comparatively slow pace of action gave the besiegers plenty of time to dig mines, construct siege engines, and even build their own fortifications. These activities are part and parcel of siege warfare, and the game would be incomplete without them. In the normal course of a war game, each turn represents only a short period of time, typically a few minutes. Obviously, this timescale is far too short to allow us to recreate the aforementioned. Therefore, to accommodate these vital aspects of the siege, we shall introduce strategic time. The attacking player may declare a change from normal time to strategic time when there are no attacking models on the table, assuming that the attacking force has not been utterly annihilated. Once strategic time has been declared, each turn represents 1 day of activity. And strategic time involves no combat, although siege engines may continue to fire, as detailed shortly. However, they cannot move and fire in the same turn. The main purpose of strategic time is to allow the besieger to construct engines, dig tunnels, and forage for supplies. These operations too are detailed later. When counters move in strategic time, troops are assumed to be doing far more than simply moving. Their movement also subsumes breaking camp, recamping, maintaining equipment, eating, going about all other daily routines. Troops therefore move relatively slowly in strategic time compared to normal game time. None of the besieging forces may move onto the tabletop while strategic time is in effect. In practice, the besieger uses strategic time as a respite to organize, regroup, and prepare for an assault. The besieging player may declare a change back to normal game time at any point. During a day's worth of movement, a unit may move up to 3 times. A non-associated character may move anywhere on the map, and an engine may be moved once, providing it hasn't fired. Mining is conducted during strategic time. However, it is part of other earthworks that will be detailed in the appropriate chapter. Foraging. The finding of supplies to sustain the force is critical to a besieger's successful siege. This may involve commandeering livestock, foodstuffs, and wagons from the local population, or even pressing the farmers into service of their new masters. For game purposes, these are all known as supplies, and the quantity of which is expressed in supply points. These points are then used to build war machines and feed troops. Foraging is a time-consuming business, and units may only forage effectively in strategic time. To do so, a unit is moved into a remote quadrant, and the player declares his intention to forage. Once there, the unit counter is not moved in the usual way. Instead, the player rolls 1d6 for each following strategic move. 1 to 2, move clockwise into adjacent remote zone. 3 to 4, move anti-clockwise into adjacent remote zone. 5 to 6, remain in the same remote zone or move to the adjacent encamped zone. All foraging units must be moved into their adjacent encamped zone at the end of their 3rd move. And supply points are accrued by foraging units at a rate of 1d6 per strategic move. Siege machines. With supply points in mind, it is siege machines that we will be spending them on. Faced by the sheer stone defences of an imposing castle or keep, any besieger would be wise to invest in a few siege machines. The crews of these engines of destruction are what make them go. A machine may not operate without a crew. Large humanoid size ratios apply when crewing war machines. For instance, an ogre-sized individual will count as 2 crew members. There are 2 types of typical war machines, open and enclosed. Enclosed are clad in hides, wooden slats, furs, even shields, whilst machines without this type of protection are classed as open. Those described as missile throwers and engines of assault are considered to be open, whilst those described as screens are considered to be enclosed. Any machine may be enclosed at the cost of 25 points. There are a series of penalties and restrictions that apply to dropped missiles and normal missile fire against siege machines and their crews, as you can see in the bottom right here. Siege machines, like any good large piece of equipment are susceptible to particularly strong individuals or other war machines. As such, anything with a strength of 7 or over may roll 1d6 with a 6, destroying the engine. Crew members are similarly targeted with 1d6 and a 6, resulting in them taking a wound. A destroyed war machine still protects its occupants. Machines use the weapon skill of their crew, who counters behind soft cover while in hand-to-hand combat. Machines may substitute crew members who are killed for those who are less dead. These models must move to the machine normally and may split off from their unit to do so. Engines of assault may be crewed by any troops, so that killed crew members may be replaced from any unit. However, missile throwers are specialized pieces of equipment, and their crews may only be sourced from the crews of other missile throwers. Thus, it is eminently useful to purchase additional crew for each of these types of machines. In addition to the war engines allowed to each army in Warhammer armies, each player may spend up to a third of the total points of the army on siege machines, with crew costs coming from the rank and file allowance. Missile throwers are long range enough to stay off the battlefield altogether. The besieging player may bring any engine onto the battlefield if he wishes, but does not necessarily have to do so for them to be effective. The ranges involved are: anything under 48 inches may fire from the tabletop only. 48 to 96 inches may fire from the ready zone, and 96 inches or more may fire from the encamped zone. Firing a siege engine from a position on the strategic map does not expose the weapon or crew. However, the defenders will be aware of the firing of a cannon or other gunpowder weapon, being able to see the smoke and hear the distant sound of it firing. Firing procedure is exactly as described in the main Warhammer Fantasy Battle rules. Weapons firing from off-table position do so at their assumed maximum range. The firer nominates which section or level is the target, and if the shot misses, it has no other effect at all. If the target is a gatehouse, a successful hit will strike the gate itself on 4+ of 1d6. Ammunition for non-gunpowder weapons is represented by ammunition counters, found at the end of the book. These counters represent stocks of bolts, rocks, stones, as well as vital supplies to maintain the engines. Each counter is marked 100, 10, 5, or 1. Ammunition costs 5 points per point if bought prior to the game starting. Gunpowder weapons have a separate counter representing cannonballs and gunpowder, as well as vital supplies to maintain the guns. Each counter is marked 100, 10, 5, or 1. Gunpowder costs 10 points per point if bought prior to the game starting. The defender does not need to use ammunition counters, and may simply make a note of the amount of ammunition available to machines operating within the castle. Caches of ammunition and gunpowder may be created on the strategic map by the attacking player within the encamped zones, forming up to 4 separate ammunition dumps, one within each quadrant. A dump may be used by any war machines in the same quadrant in that turn. The attacker may move ammunition and gunpowder from dump to dump in strategic time. It may not be moved at any other time. One unit may move 1 point of ammunition per unit member per strategic move to the encamped zone of an adjacent quadrant. I hope you got that. I'll be testing you later. Every time a weapon fires, it uses a single point of ammunition or gunpowder. As mentioned, under strategic time, war machines may continue to fire on the castle during strategic time. All fire is reckoned in volleys. A volley is presumed to comprise of 5 shots against the same section or level, with each volley directed against a separate section level as desired. Stationary missile throwers may fire 12 volleys per day with the following modifiers. -1 for every crewman required to man it. For example, a 10-man mortar will be able to fire 2 volleys in a day, whilst a 3-man bolt thrower will be able to fire 9 volleys in a day. -1 for each missing crewman. For example, a 10-man mortar with 9 crew can fire 1 volley, whilst a 2-man bolt thrower will be able to fire 8 volleys in a day. To hit sections or levels, roll 1d6, which indicates the number of hits upon the section or level at which the volley was aimed at. Structural damage is calculated normally. On a 6, no structural damage is caused, but any models occupying the section or level are hit instead, with 1d6 models being hit. On a 6, a character is hit. If no character is present, then the result is re-rolled. The defender's missile throwers may be positioned on the castle to fire on attacking forces. They may be placed anywhere that allows their size of base, so generally speaking, not upon single passageway ramparts. The following restrictions apply to counter battery fire. Weapons with a range of more than 48 inches may fire into the attacker's ready zone. It is not possible for engines inside the castle to fire into the attacker's encamp zone. Weapons may only fire into the corresponding quadrant that the castle piece is facing. The defender may choose to direct fire against troops or machines. Against troops, roll 1d6. On a 6, the shot has hit a unit of troops, to be randomly determined if there are multiple units in the zone, with 1d6 models being hit. On a 6, a character is hit. If no character is present, then the result is re-rolled. Against machines, roll 1d6, and on a 6, the shot has hit a machine, to be randomly determined if there are multiple machines in the zone. Strategic counter-fire is handled in the same way as strategic fire. Volleys may be aimed at units or machines in the same way as normal fire. Roll 1d6 for each volley, 1 to 5 indicating the number of shots which hit, with a 6 indicating a miss. Some beautiful war machines from the studio, a gob lobber, skull chucker, bazooka team, and a man mangler. Plus, how could we breeze past this beautiful shot of a Titanic siege game? The following page details the profiles of missile-throwing engines. On to engines of assault then. The stone walls and sturdy gates of a castle present a major obstacle to the attackers. The more cunning races have developed means of overcoming these obstacles, or more precisely, of smashing them to bits. There are drills, picks, rams, and many more besides, but any siege machine which attacks walls and gates directly is called an engine of assault. Engines of assault are traditionally built around a wheeled frame to allow the crew to move the engine into the assault. The points values given assume the engine is open by design. The crew of these machines is typically 4 at a minimum, with a fully crewed machine being able to move up to 3 inches in movement. If the machine doesn't have a full crew, then it will move at -1 inch per missing crew member. A machine crewed by a single model will be unable to move. Engines are pushed directly forwards or may turn with a turning radius of 3 times their speed. Gosh, it's almost like Gorkamorka, isn't it? Thus, it is essential to appropriately line up assault engines to be directly opposite the section or gate they intend to attack at the start of the game. As such, it is particularly difficult to deceive the defender once your siege equipment is deployed. The slow speed of these machines leaves little in the way of tactical maneuver during a fast-paced assault on a citadel bristling with troops and weaponry of every sort. Once in contact with a section, the assault engine hits automatically, with a roll to wound being taken with the engine's strength against the section's toughness. As you can see here, we have some more gorgeous war machines and some fun illustrations too. The following page details the profiles of various assault engines. Screens. Screens are the third class of siege engine. The purpose of screens is to allow troops to approach the castle under cover, protecting them from missile fire. Examples include mantlets, sails, and siege towers. All screens are considered to be enclosed. A screen may not have more crew than its crew size, so a unit of 30 orcs may not hide behind a single mantlet. As with all machines, they are moved at 3 inches and will move slower by -1 inch for each missing crew member. A screen may be combined with any other machine type already described. A machine may not be combined with a screen that has a smaller crew. For example, a 6-man crewed ram may not be combined with a screen that has a crew of less than 6. When discussing a screened machine, the machine to which the screen is fitted is called the secondary machine. In the top picture we have a mighty fortress stretching the entire length of a tabletop, representing the outer city walls of a powerful city state. Below we have a traditional looking siege tower combined with a battering ram and an orc skull crusher. Types of screens involved are mantlets, sails, siege towers, and any secondary machines to which screens have been fitted. Roofs and drawbridges act as you might expect, with roofs being able to house missile troops and or spellcasters, whilst drawbridges allow assaulting troops access to the associated level the drawbridge drops level at. And the following page details the profiles of screens. Supplies. Supplies are critical to siege success for both sides. The rules in this chapter detail how the attacker accumulates war supplies for his siege efforts. This will be followed by the position of the defender, who must rely solely on stockpiles. Construction. Besieging a castle is a long process. The besieger will require not only the patience of Job, but also sufficient materials and labour for the task at hand. A large chunk of the attacking army's resources will be needed for building siege machines, digging mines, and erecting earthworks. All of these processes are covered by the term construction. Some siege machinery is transported to the site of the siege along with the attacking army itself. Cannons, mortars, and some engines of war are made of prefabricated parts that can be assembled when they arrive at their destination. However, the attacker can never bring all the machinery he needs with him, so he will have to build a large part of what he wants using materials gathered from the local area. So we have a chat about how construction proceeds and supplies being allocated, followed by the vagaries of human and non-human works. Of note here is that trolls are particularly useless when it comes to construction, and as you might expect, Skaven are particularly good at mining. On the following page we have special troop types that make sieges all the more manageable: sappers, tunnel fighters, and dwarf engineers. After which we start on earthworks, mining, and the construction of those most magnificent siege machines. Flying creatures. What could be more useful than something that can simply hop, skip, and jump over your enemy's walls? Something that can fly right inside them, of course. In some respects, the life of a medieval warlord in our own world was quite soft. For one thing, he didn't have to worry about rampaging dragons, wyverns, or other flying beasties attacking his castle from the air. We, on the other hand, are not so fortunate. Aerial combat is part and parcel of fantasy wargames, and an important element in any siege. As you might expect, flying creatures need to fly at the respective level of the walls of the fortress they are assaulting. This is represented by flying levels, as described in the Warhammer Fantasy Rulebook, to be detailed in another video, no less. We have some restrictions about who and what can engage who and what, which are generally within the realm of common sense, as befitting the Warhammer rules, although we do have to be careful we only fly over walls rather than into them, as the results are somewhat messy. Magic. Now, it's all very well laying stone upon stone until you're sure that not even the most determined dragon could force an entrance into your country retreat. But what about magic? What is to stop your opponent teleporting assassins into your very bedchamber? Who can guard against spells of destruction that can tumble your walls and ruin your interior decorating? The answer is simple. With one of our special multi-coverage magical insurance policies, you can cover yourself against acts of any demonic or supernatural origin, as well as the workings of magic in general. What sensible householder could fail to take advantage of this wonderful offer? As magic is part of everyday life in any good fantasy tale, all castles have a certain amount of built-in magical protection. Indeed, it would be foolish to build a fortress without taking out this simple insurance. This makes it difficult to cast spells across the boundaries of the castle, and gives the castle structure a measure of protection against destructive magic too. This magical protection makes it particularly difficult for spellcasters to formulate magic on the opposite side of the fortress boundary, with anything other than a roll of a 6 on a die being, if not a serious annoyance, then complete failure of the spell. This boundary also extends to creatures of supernatural origins, such as demons and the undead. As such, they must pass a test to cross the boundary. Failure to do so results in them being stymied by the power of the fortress itself. They may attempt to cross the boundary in subsequent turns, but otherwise they must stand and wait to pass. Finally, wizards may not cast spells during the turn they cross the boundary. Fire. Fire is a deadly enemy to the property owner. Fortunately, you are sensible and have built your castle from stone. The castle walls are therefore not flammable and cannot be affected by fire. However, the castle interiors are eminently flammable, being generally made from wood. Siege machines too are flammable, although they may be immune to most missile attacks. Fire can easily turn the days of hard work into a pile of smouldering ash. If a machine is hit by a flaming weapon of any kind, roll 1d6. On a 6, the fire has taken hold, and a suitable marker should be placed next to the stricken engine. Following turns result in the GM rolling on a table to discover the machine's fate, the rolls of which vary slightly between open and enclosed machines, but in brief, a low roll and the fire goes out, a high roll and the fire has destroyed the machine. Otherwise, continue to roll each turn. Expanding the castle. The castle you receive in a single mighty fortress has enough pieces to make a border fortress, i.e. a fully enclosed space. But there are of course many different iterations of the castle. The following page details the Fastness Castle Map, a formidable fortress indeed. We then move on to adapting the castle, doubling walls, making corner pieces, thickening gatehouses, and generally chopping your beautiful relic of a castle up into bits. Glossary. Finally, well, kind of, we have the glossary. Your mind will have been blasted by the hundreds of nuances, little rules, and general tomfoolery of converting your antique castle, so this is a very handy page to remind you of all the technical terms employed throughout the book. Now, I don't think it's entirely appropriate to delve into Siege in the 41st millennium when I know you are here for good old-fashioned Warhammer Fantasy battle. So, with that in mind, I'll leave the 40k stuff alone for the moment. That is until I cover the Rogue Trader rules in depth at a later time, and believe you me, I will get around to it. We just need a blood moon followed by a high spring tide and the planets to align, so I'll hop straight on that. within the next 10 millennia or so. Handout section. Right, the last part of the book then. We have a border fortress castle and strategic map to photocopy for use during your games. This is followed by some command sheets for the defense of Kara's Lumbar. Now, if you're a true professional, you won't even bother painting a load of pesky models. You'll simply line up your little counters of dwarves and goblins, all neatly printed on card, and have at it. We also have some templates, and even an advert from Mighty Fortress, which strikes me as odd, bearing in mind you've been subjected to the sheer amount of joy you will discover while playing with a Mighty Fortress for the past 100 pages or so. But just to tip you over the edge, here is an advert of the thing we've been reading about for the past week. Anyway, we have a rules summary and then a few pages of counters. There you go.
Thoughts on Siege. I picked up this tome with Bring Out Your Lead firmly in mind after having witnessed and participated in some of the titanic Siege games that were played there, and I'm so glad I did. Reading through this great book has inspired me in so many ways, from creating my own mighty fortress to basing up hordes of trusty orcs, from appreciating the trials of the defender to the tribulations of the attacker, from designing and sculpting my own siege weapons to repurposing old toys for use on the tabletop. There's a glut of fantastic stuff just waiting to be glued, sculpted and painted out there. I guess what I'm trying to say is this book is an absolute must for any fan of Oldhammer. Interestingly, I had the newer version of the Siege rules, but neglected to avail myself of these, to be frank, quite superior original rules until recently. It just goes to show even crusty old gits like yours truly have something to learn. But what have we learned today? People who cut up antique mighty fortresses should be hung up by their ankles from the battlements until dead. Orcs, when in number, are best based on strips of laser-cut MDF for ease of movement around the battlefield. Undead are pretty much useless in the assault. Siege equipment doesn't grow on trees, but is rather made from trees. Monopose models are acceptable in horde armies. Skaven are excellent miners and would enjoy comparing notes with dwarfs, if only they could get along. Trolls are terrible at construction projects. Rick Priestley looks dead good in a wife beater. Oh, and lastly, magic isn't all it's cracked up to be. Well, that was epic, wasn't it? This will be by far the longest video I've made for the channel, so I hope you enjoyed this raunchy romp through Warhammer Siege. The best book you've probably read. I mean, if you're watching this, then the chances are high you're quite the man about town and have many leather-bound books of your own. And if you haven't got a copy of this tremendous piece of wargaming history, I highly recommend you pick up a copy from eBay, alongside any number of other Warhammer Fantasy Battle tomes. With that in mind, remember to like, share, subscribe, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Is that right?